The VTuber industry has been a diverse market for both individuals and corporations. However, like many other similar markets, the VTuber industry is heavily lopsided. The few biggest VTubers gain thousands if not millions of views, while the vast majority are struggling to even reach 3-digit audiences for their live streams. This is not a fair game. For the majority of people who spend time and effort in producing videos and streams, they seem to gain less than what they deserve. This is a pretty common phenomenon in the entertaining industry, where the popular ones get more popular, but the less popular ones are still buried under, alongside with other competitors. A prime example would be the Twitch industry, where there are a few famous Twitch streamers that gain thousands if not millions of views, while the vast majority of Twitch streamers are struggling in the 2 to 3 digits. The current VTuber audience can be roughly divided into two portions: the group that consists of members of Hololive, Nichisanji and related VTubers, and VTubers outside of this group. The audiences in these two groups are not mutually exclusive, and quite a substantial amount of audience actually watch both of them. This division is especially true for audiences outside of Japan, where a lot of their only experience of VTubers are probably from either Hololive or Nichisanji. And from this perspective, the market imbalance makes sense, since most people are watching only Hololive or Nichisanji VTubers. They have no motive at watching other VTubers. Thus, the increasing audience are only unilateral to Hololive and Nichisanji, while it only benefits little to the other VTubers. Moreover, the group outside of Hololive and Nichisanji is huge, larger than you would expect. The small benefits from the increasing audience will then be even more divided. Is this a good thing? Well, it depends greatly on your perspective. Why don't we dive in a bit to discover some of the cause and effects this brought to the whole scene in general. The growth of the VTuber market is disproportionate, where most of the growth happens in the big corporation group. The reason why them being the fastest growing one can be regarded as a natural result of their efforts at discovering emerging markets, where high growth rates of developing markets are a common occurrence. The audience incentives play an important role here. Usually as their first watched VTubers, the audience would tend to keep watching the same group of VTubers and never leave the so-called comfort zone, thus developing an addiction towards said VTubers. This is also the reason why there's a huge gap between the big corporation group and the others. It is mostly because the audience failed to transfer from the big group to the smaller group. There were simply no incentives for the audience to do so. The target audience of the VTuber industry is primarily younger working adults, since they have the most chance to donate to the VTubers or to buy goods. However, considering most working adults do not have the time and effort to discover new VTubers without the help of others, such as the YouTube algorithms, the incentives in doing so seems non-existent. Moreover, how people approach VTubers is also a main point on how VTubers gain an audience. For the Japanese audience, there might exist less of a barrier than non-Japanese speaking audiences, since most of the VTubers are located in Japan and are aimed at the Japanese audience. The usual barrier encountered by them is less than what the non-Japanese speaking audience would encounter. However, the market size is limited, or in this case, the amount of Japanese audience is less than adequate for all the VTubers to survive. To ensure to receive as much audience as possible, marketing strategies must be employed. For big company operated VTubers, this is not the most concerning, since both the resources and the marketing team can help them take care of the issue. It's just a matter of time. But for smaller companies and individual VTubers, this is another story. How to both attract and retain the audience is both important aspect on how a VTuber can gain an audience, as the market is very volatile. Without clever marketing strategies and audience retention methods, the audience can float away easily without a trace. Audience retention is also a good topic to look into when it comes to attracting the audience. Successfully retaining an audience means a more stable and constant stream of money, while also helping the VTubers to promote their content. Like a snowball, if you will. Audience engagement plays an important role in this, as successful audience engagement strategies more than often can net more effect on both audience attraction and audience retention. An example of retained audience promoting VTubers is the many subtitle groups we saw around YouTube. They, as the more vocal members of the audience, have the most value to the VTubers when it comes to breaking the geographical barrier. Audience retention is also a problem for individual operated VTubers. In my previous video, I pointed out that individual VTubers have the problem of inconsistent video quality. This plays a big role in audience engagement and in the relationship of audience retention. The inconsistent nature of these VTubers makes them hard to catch audience, since most audiences only want constantly high quality videos or streams directly delivered to their mouth. And even quality is on par with the industry standard, since a lot of the smaller VTubers only operate their YouTube business as a part-time job. The quantity of these high quality videos are rarely being enough for the audience to binge on. Here's where Hololive and Nijisanji comes in. Their consistently high quality streams have a higher quantity than most of the VTubers, therefore filling in the gap and attracting the audience to them. This is also how some of the audience of the 4 VTuber giants are being attracted towards Hololive and Nijisanji. The amount of VTubers far outweighs what the Japanese market can bear. I have discussed a lot on how VTubers attract and stand out from such a saturated market. However, the integral development of the VTuber market, in other words how the industry developed as a whole, is still a topic that I haven't seen anyone talk about. And this kinda makes sense, since a lot of the topic me and other individuals discuss are pretty isolated, often only involving 1 to 2 VTubers of the group. Especially with such a disproportionate market, the amount of people who talks about VTubers outside of the small circle of Hololive and Nijisanji is minimal at best, at least for our non-Japanese speaking audience. Although they only represent a small portion of the whole scene, their actions are much more impactful than many other small VTubers. In other words, they are the ones who lead the market, and to some extent the development of the whole market. So what's the deal of the current market? From the recent events, we can safely assume that the current trend of the scene is to engage with overseas audience, at least for the big boys that is. The increase in VTuber to overseas viewers interactions, including English-speaking and non-English-speaking audiences, and the newly established EM branch of Hololive, further signifies the start of the VTuber trend in the West. The big corporation leading trends do, however, have one fundamental problem. They do not translate well enough to the smaller VTubers. The thing is, not all smaller VTubers have the ability to accommodate the changing market. You can say that this is the nature of a free market, where the unsuitable ones get disqualified. This is true in some sense, but this is more than just the revolution of the scene. It also indicates how susceptible the market is to new changes. In my video about Minecraft, I've expressed my opinions on how Minecraft was and still is the go-to game for VTubers to do content. This can apply to changes in the scene in general, where VTubers not being diverse enough to do changes will inevitably cause the downfall of their audience count. Studies have also shown similar trends in other industries that rely on social media. Quote, "To win and retain large audiences in the long run, social media influencers need to step out of their comfort zone and seek variation in their media content style and repertoire. The above comfort zone problem is a problem to both the bigger and smaller VTubers. Their mentalities of not changing will only cause their downfall, and consequently the downfall of the whole scene. However, there are some VTubers who are trying to circumvent this mentality and are trying something new. This is a good trend to see, and I would like more of these kinds of VTubers to circumvent the old, established, and boring rule sets. The market is still and will still be led by VTubers from Hololive, Nijisanji, other similarly big corporations, and individuals who have heavy relationships with them. This is the natural progression of the scene. Is this bad? It depends. In my opinion, this is not a particularly bad trend, and even if it is bad, there's nothing we can do to change this. The point lies on whether or not the public have the incentive to do so, and to be honest, they have none. That also kind of explains why people would rather still support the VTuber or even the company if they had done something morally incorrect. They are addicted to the VTubers they are currently watching, and they do not have the incentives of discovering new VTubers. The VTubers they are watching are their everything. Therefore, if the VTubers have done something wrong, and they risk losing their beloved VTubers, usually they will try to defend. This is also partially why big VTubers are less prone to audience retention problems. Remember the Hakooshi tactics I mentioned in Coco's video. The attraction and the retention power from the box is like a hotel with everything you want. Then, going outside from the hotel is basically improbable for you, as you have literally zero reasons to go out. Why bother finding new VTubers when you can enjoy as much or even more in a confined VTuber group? So, why should we care about the development of the scene? Well, actually, there's no need to. This is not a must. There really is no need to know the integral development of the scene as an audience. However, it ultimately comes down to personal preference. Just like how you would choose to or not to know about the inner lives of the actors behind the virtual character, or the dramas surrounding the VTuber scene, etc. This is the same, where if you don't know any of the things I said in this video, you lose nothing. Alternatively, if you watch this video from start to finish, congratulations, you gained some newfound knowledge that has almost no use for your viewing of your favorite VTubers. So what's the point of knowing this? A direct answer to this is that these can be an indication for the market trend. For example, how will the market develop? How the market will react to new changes and trends in the scene, etc. The studies of the development of the market is after all a combination of a series of indicators: market size, liquidity, concentration, volatility, etc. It reflects part of the market's characteristics, and as a result, it can be a good point on discussing what a market is. And with this, we can expect how a market or a scene will grow, how it will fall. And this is the key point to studying the development of the scene, to predict what will come. In the introduction part, I mentioned that to determine whether or not the dividing nature of the VTuber market is a good thing, it comes down to your perspective. This is because predicting the future does not mean determining whether or not if the future we predicted is bad. It is just an indication, and what determines the trend is bad or not is relative to the perspectives of different members of the community. For example, is the current VTuber scene leaning towards oligopoly a bad thing? To the companies who have the majority of the income? Obviously not. To the others, however, it might be bad for them, as they gain much less than what they supposedly deserve. That's why you should care about the integral development of the scene, if you are seeking a reason to. It is to know what to expect from the future of the scene. But when it comes to the judgment on whether or not this trend should be endorsed, it's none other than you to decide. There's no doubt that the VTuber scene is growing at a pace that no one expects back in 2018 or even 2019. It has now grown into such a big market that it's not in the millions, but billions of yens worth. Betas, a production company, suggested that the revenue generated by the market is in between 5 billion yen and 10 billion yen, and in the upcoming years, it will become 50 billion yen. This is an extremely lucrative market that a lot of companies are starting to notice and are trying to get a grasp into. However, like many other entertainment sub-industry, the VTuber market is also very unstable and is full of problems that seems like no one else wanted to deal with. However, what we can prepare for is the unavoidable future of the fall of a lot of the older VTubers. The constantly changing market will wait for no one. Only a single mistake that they made is enough for them to get kicked off from the market forever. In a sense, the VTuber scene eerily resembles the idol market, and some of the companies are indeed making their virtual talents to be closer to what an idol resembles. But for now, why don't we just sit back, relax, and enjoy our favorite VTubers?